Welcome to Unit 2, Chapters 4 through 6. Today we're going to be looking at choices in markets and governments, and consumer choices, and then production choices and costs as well. Market performance is how well and how efficient the markets are working. And to make markets efficient, trade has to be efficient. And when we trade between two people, we can determine if it's efficient, if each party is better off, or I guess at least one party is better off and the other party is no worse off. Hopefully both of them are better off, but for sure one is better off and the other is at least as good as they were before the transaction. Market failures happen when transactions are not efficient and a market can't sustain or can't run and be fair to everyone using the resources in an efficient way. One of the ways that a market failure happens is through externalities. This is where there's a third-party cost to it. So you have two parties who are working together and they both are better off, just like we talked about in an efficient market. But then there's a third party that's affected. Kind of the most common way that I look at this is pollution. The party A has a factory and they make products. They sell them to party B, and party B is happy because they get a good price on them. But party C is living next to the factory, and now their water is polluted and they get sick because of the pollution. They're not being paid anything for that. It's an unintended side effect from party A and party B's transaction. Externalities add extra costs to the process that someone else outside of it has to pay for. Another market failure happens when private industry won't create products that society needs. And when this happens, lots of times the government will step in and they'll create a public good. Now the reason this happens is because whatever this good is, whatever this product is, it can't be given to one person without also being provided to another. And when it's provided to another person, it can be provided to somebody else for no more cost. So the best example I can think of for this is national defense in the United States. If we look at the property of exclusion, if a private industry wanted to keep us safe, they could do that. But if I chose not to pay, right, and you chose to pay, they can't protect you but not protect me. So there's no exclusion. They can't say you can't have this because you're not paying. Like when I go to Walmart and buy groceries, right? If I don't pay, they say you can't have that. With national defense, if I don't pay, they can't say you don't have that. So private industry doesn't want to do it. The other part of a public good is it has to be non-rivalry, or in this case, rivalry is the vocabulary word. And that means that if I use it, it doesn't affect you using it at all. It's no more cost for them to protect me as to protect you and me. And so private industry won't do this because there's no profit in them for them. It's hard for them to convince anybody to be willing to pay them. So lots of times the government will step in and they'll create a public good. National defense, parks, roads, sorts of things are all public goods. This brings us to the free rider problem. This basically just says that because it's non-excludable, anybody can use the product, anybody can be protected for national defense, for example. If someone chooses, like if I choose not to pay my fair share, not to pay my taxes, they're still going to protect me. They're still going to make sure that I am protected through national defense. So that's another type of market failure. Insufficient competition is another market failure that happens oftentimes. The best example of this is a monopoly, where there's only one single seller of a good or service. This can change efficiency in a market because a monopolist can charge a very high price, especially if it's a necessity. and then consumers have to pay that very high price to get it, and so therefore the monopolist or the company that's a monopoly is able to gain great gains from it, and the person who has to pay for it is not getting what they're supposed to be getting, and maybe they're worse off because of it. So it's not an efficient transaction anymore. Next, we're going to look at consumer choices. The base of consumer choice comes from utility. Utility is the pleasure, the satisfaction, the gain you get from buying a product. Marginal utility is how much of that usefulness, how much of that gain you get for buying one more product. So when you buy a TV, you get lots of usefulness, you get lots of satisfaction from it. And then you buy a second TV, and you get more usefulness, more satisfaction, because now you have a TV in 2 different rooms of your house. So the second one is, the difference between the two is marginal utility. How much more satisfaction overall did you get because you bought the second one? The principle of diminishing marginal returns says that the second one is not going to be as big of satisfaction as the first one. So your second TV, you're not going to be as excited, you're not going to have as much usefulness, you're not going to have as much pleasure from the second one as you would have from the first one. If you think of that in terms of maybe a bottle of water, you're outside and you're really, really hot and really, really thirsty. So you stop at the gas station to buy a bottle of water, and that first bottle of water tastes so good. It really quenches your thirst. It really tastes fantastic. But you were super, super thirsty, so you buy a second bottle of water. Now that second bottle of water makes you feel better, right? You still enjoy it. It still tastes really good, but it doesn't give you as much satisfaction or as much usefulness as the first one. And then the third bottle of water gives you even less satisfaction than the third, and than the second, the fourth less than the third, and the more water you have, the less each one gets you satisfaction. You have more satisfaction overall from that stuff, but each individual one is less and less satisfaction than the one before it. That's the principle of diminishing marginal returns. Consumer equilibrium is where we decide how much of each product we want to buy. We know that we buy multiple items, right? Maybe we buy ice cream sundaes and we buy ice cream cones. Ice cream sundaes are more expensive, but they also give us a lot more satisfaction because they have chocolate and whipped cream and all kinds of yummy stuff on it. And an ice cream cone gives us some satisfaction, but not nearly as much, but it costs a lot less. So consumer equilibrium is that point where we decide, do we buy 2 ice cream sundaes and 5 ice cream cones because ice cream cones are cheaper? Or do we just buy 4 ice cream cones and 0 ice cream sundaes because the ice cream cones are cheaper? So that's what consumer equilibrium is, figuring out how much of one product we're going to buy versus the other based on how much usefulness we think we're going to get from it. And again, utility is something that it's just kind of a gut feeling. You can't quantify how much usefulness or how much satisfaction very easily you get out of it. You just know what you like, and you know that you'll get more usefulness out of it. And this brings us to the law of demand again. The diminishing marginal utility, right, because each item we buy gives us less satisfaction, kind of explains the law of demand. Because how much utility we get out of it is how much we're willing to pay for it. And so if the price goes up, we're not going to get as much utility out of it versus the price, so we'll be less likely to buy it. And if we buy 2 or 3 or 4, we're going to get less utility out of each one of those, and so therefore we'll be less willing to buy it. So as quantity increases, the price has to decrease for us to want to continue to buy it. The third major item we're going to talk about today is production and production costs. As you know, businesses are in business to make money. That doesn't mean that that's the only thing they're doing, that they're going to do everything they can just to make a profit, just to maximize exactly every single penny they're going to get. But overall, their final goal is to be able to make a profit. And the decisions that they make is to keep costs low and keep revenues high. When economists think of costs, they think of opportunity costs. This leads us to two different types of costs: the explicit costs and implicit costs. Explicit costs are costs that we have to pay for, you write a check for, you can see it leaving your bank account. Implicit costs are costs that are kind of hidden and you don't see those costs nearly as easily and as much. So let me give you an example of that. If you think about a car, you can either buy a car or lease a car. And let's say you buy a car and take a loan out for it, or you lease the car. So you have payments every single month. Each of those payments are explicit costs. Every time you write the check, you know that your bank account is going down a little bit for it. But implicit costs are a little bit different. Let's say you bought the car outright from the beginning. You wrote one big check for $20,000, got the car, and you're all set. You're all done. That's one explicit cost, and it's all over, right? Not exactly. You also have implicit costs. You could have taken that $20,000 and invested it and got some sort of return on it. You're no longer able to get that return on that investment, so therefore that's an implicit cost. It's money you would have gotten, but now don't get because you spent it on the car. So because there's two types of costs, there are also two types of profit. There's pure economic profit and accounting profit. Accounting profit is what you probably normally think of in business. It's revenue minus cost, right? Or minus the explicit costs. Economic profit factors in those explicit costs as well, which is important. Fixed costs and variable costs are very important concepts in production costs. Variable costs are the costs that change as you make more products. It comes from variable inputs, right? So labor, for example, is a variable input. It changes based on how much we need it. We can hire more workers, we can let workers go, we can cut back hours, we can add overtime and increase hours. All those sorts of things pretty easily in the short run. And so therefore, costs can change based on how much we have to pay those people. There are other variable costs, obviously, as well. That's just one of the examples. Fixed costs are costs that don't change, that they're pretty much set, and they come from fixed inputs. So for example, a building, right? Your factory. You had to pay $1 million to build your factory. Now, whether you create one widget or 1 million widgets, that factory still costs you exactly the same amount to make. So it doesn't change based on how many products you make, and you're set with how much that is going to cost you.